What if, at the very moment of death, you didn't meet God, an angel, or even darkness, but instead, you found yourself standing before a temple, not a temple made of stone or wood, but one that radiates pure light, holding within it the ultimate truth about who you really are. In 1944, famed psychologist Carl Jung had such an experience during a near-death event that would forever change his understanding of life, death, and the soul. Jung's vision of this radiant temple wasn't just a beautiful image. It was, in his words, a gateway. A profound threshold where the soul meets what he called the self, the totality of who we are, beyond the masks, beyond the ego, beyond the life we've lived. And here's the thing. Jung didn't consider this vision a fantasy or a fleeting hallucination. For him, it was a psychological and spiritual truth as real as the ground we stand on, and one that carries a message for every single one of us. Because what he saw suggests that death is not the end, but a passage, and that the state of your soul when you reach that passage matters more than anything else. It's not about religion, dogma, or superstition. It's about the deepest parts of your being and whether you've come to know them, to integrate them before you reach that final door. Now here's where it gets even more intriguing. Jung believed that this gateway to the self might not only be waiting for you in the afterlife. It could already be shaping your life right now, influencing your dreams, your decisions, even the challenges you face. Every act of self-awareness, every moment you confront your shadow, every truth you dare to face. These are steps toward that temple. So I want you to stay with me, because in the rest of this video, we're going to dive deep into what Jung saw, why it matters, and how understanding this vision might completely change the way you live and the way you prepare for what comes next. Let's go back to 1944. Carl Jung, already one of the most respected minds in psychology, was 68 years old when he suffered a massive heart attack. He was rushed to the hospital, his body frail, his pulse weak. What happened next wasn't something science could easily explain, at least not with the tools it had at the time. Lying in that hospital bed, Jung felt a sudden shift. The physical weight of his body seemed to vanish. The beeping of medical instruments, the sounds of the room, they faded into silence. And then, as if gravity had let go of him entirely, he began to rise. At first, he found himself floating above his own body, seeing the scene below with an almost detached curiosity. Doctors and nurses moved quickly around him, working to keep him alive. But instead of fear, he felt an incredible calm, as if the part of him that truly mattered was no longer bound to the hospital or even to the earth. The rising continued. He ascended higher and higher until the world below became small, a shimmering blue and green sphere hanging in the vast darkness of space. Time itself felt different, stretching, slowing, maybe even disappearing altogether. And then he saw it. Suspended in the distance was a temple of light not built from stone or wood, but formed entirely of radiant, living brilliance. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. The light wasn't blinding, it was pure, welcoming, and filled with a sense of deep truth. The temple seemed to breathe its glow, pulsing like the heartbeat of the universe. Jung felt himself drawn toward it, as though every fiber of his being recognized it. The closer he came, the more he felt an overwhelming sense of clarity, what he would later describe as an encounter with ultimate truth. Every question, every doubt, every layer of confusion seemed to dissolve in that light. It wasn't that he understood in the way we usually mean, it was more like he became part of the understanding itself. Then he saw the entrance a vast doorway that seemed to be more than a physical threshold. It was alive with significance. On one side was everything he had known as life, his identity, his work, his relationships, his physical body. On the other side was something beyond words. But just as he prepared to cross into the temple, something happened. He felt a presence silent but undeniable, communicating to him without words. It's not your time yet. In that instant, Jung knew he could not go forward. The pull of the temple was strong, but so was the realization that he had more to do. More to learn, more to integrate, more to give to the world he had not yet left. And then, as quickly as he had left it, he was back in his hospital bed. The weight of his body returned. The noise of the room rushed back in. He opened his eyes alive, but forever changed. This experience would leave a permanent mark on Jung. He didn't dismiss it as a hallucination brought on by a dying brain. He didn't chalk it up to fever dreams or wishful thinking. For him, it was real, perhaps more real than waking life. And in the years that followed, he would speak carefully, but with conviction, about what the temple represented. For Jung, this temple of light was more than a vision, it was the gateway to the self. In Jungian psychology, the self is the complete union of the conscious and unconscious mind, the full truth of who you are, beneath the layers of persona and shadow. To reach it is to achieve total wholeness. The temple was, in his view, the final destination of the soul's journey. But that moment when he was stopped, that told him something critical. Not everyone is ready to pass through. It's not just a matter of dying, it's about whether you've done the inner work, faced your own darkness, and integrated your full being. When Jung returned to life, he carried that understanding with him. It shaped his later writings, his lectures, and the advice he gave to those seeking deeper meaning. The temple was no longer just an image in his mind. It was a reminder that each day of life is part of preparing for that final crossing. When Jung described the temple of light from his near-death experience, he wasn't talking about a physical building you could visit. He was speaking in the language of the psyche, a language made of symbols, archetypes, and deep inner truths. In Jungian psychology, that radiant temple represented the self with a capital S. And the self isn't just you in the everyday sense. It's not your job title, your personality, or even your conscious thoughts. It's the totality of your being, the union of your conscious mind and your unconscious depths. It's every part of you, including the ones you've hidden, denied, or never discovered. Jung saw the self as the ultimate destination of life's inner journey. Reaching it isn't about traveling to some distant place. It's about integrating all the fragments of who you are into one whole, complete being. That's why, in his vision, the temple didn't just stand there as a random image. It was the meeting place between the soul and its deepest truth. And then there was the gateway. In Jung's vision, the gateway into the temple wasn't just a door, it was a threshold of completeness. In psychological terms, it marked the point of individuation completed. Individuation is a core concept in Jung's work. It's the lifelong process of becoming your true self, of reconciling opposites within you. Your light and your shadow, your reason and your instinct, your personal story, and your collective humanity. Crossing that threshold meant the journey was finished. The integration was complete. The soul had arrived at wholeness. But here's the striking part. Jung understood this temple and its gateway as both a spiritual and psychological reality. For him, they weren't separate realms. The mind and the soul are two sides of the same coin, and the work we do on one inevitably affects the other. The temple symbolized the convergence point where psychological growth and spiritual evolution meet. Think about it. Most of us live with a gap between who we are on the surface and who we are underneath. We play roles, wear masks, and sometimes even convince ourselves that those masks are the whole truth. But deep down, the self waits unchanging whole and patient for the moment when we're ready to see it without filters. That's why the temple in Jung's vision radiated light. Light in dreams and symbols often represents consciousness, awareness, and truth. It's the illumination that comes when you finally see all of yourself, not just the parts you like, but the parts you've avoided. And stepping through that gateway into the temple means accepting it all. Now here's where this becomes more than just a beautiful image. Jung's vision suggests that the gateway to the self isn't something you encounter only in death. It might appear in moments of profound insight, deep healing, or life-changing transformation. Anytime you face a truth about yourself that changes the way you live, you are in a sense standing before that same gateway. The question is, are you ready to step through? Because crossing it in Jung's terms isn't just a matter of wanting to. It requires the work of a lifetime. It means facing your shadow, the parts of yourself you'd rather ignore. It means reconciling contradictions, forgiving yourself for old wounds, and claiming your full humanity. And that's why, in his vision, Jung couldn't yet enter. Not because he was unworthy, but because his work wasn't finished. The self was there waiting, but he still had more to integrate, more to live. This is what makes the temple such a powerful symbol. It's not just about what happens after death. It's a reminder here and now that the way you live determines the soul you'll bring to that final threshold. So ask yourself, if you were to stand before the gateway today, would you recognize the self that waits inside? And more importantly, would you be ready to walk through? When Jung spoke of the temple of light, he made one thing clear. It wasn't tied to any single religion, culture, or creed. This temple wasn't a Christian church, a Buddhist pagoda, or a Hindu mandir. It was something far more universal. In Jung's eyes, the temple was a symbol, and symbols are the language of the psyche. A true symbol doesn't just belong to one tradition. It belongs to the human experience itself. That's why people from vastly different backgrounds can describe visions of light, a gateway, or a sacred place at the threshold of death. It's not because they all learned the same doctrine. It's because the psyche speaks to us in images that transcend cultural boundaries. And here's what's fascinating. When you compare Jung's vision to modern near-death experience NDE accounts, the similarities are almost uncanny. People today with no connection to Jung or even to psychology often describe being surrounded by a radiant light that feels alive and intelligent. Many speak of reaching a point of no return, sometimes in the form of a gate, a river, or a line in the landscape. They talk about feeling complete peace and an overwhelming sense of belonging, like they're finally coming home. For Jung, these parallels weren't coincidence. They pointed to a deeper reality. The temple was a universal archetype, an image arising from the collective unconscious, a layer of the human mind that we all share. In this space, the personal merges with the eternal, and the boundaries between individual experience and shared human truth dissolve. But Jung also believed the temple held a challenge. He insisted that not everyone is ready to step through that gateway. Why? Because the self, for the wholeness that the temple represents, requires integration before it can be fully embraced. Integration means reconciling the opposites within you, your light and your shadow, your kindness and your anger, your courage and your fear. We tend to live split lives, showing one side to the world and hiding another in the depths of our unconscious. For Jung, the work of life was to face these hidden parts and bring them into balance. Only then, he said, could we approach the self without being overwhelmed. So in his vision, the temple wasn't just a reward at the end of life. It was a mirror. If you approached it without having done the inner work, you might find you couldn't step inside. But if you had faced yourself fully, both your darkness and your light, then that gateway could open, and the light within could welcome you in. This is why Jung's vision still matters today. It's not simply about what happens after death, it's about how we live now. The temple is a symbol of the wholeness waiting within each of us, and the gateway is the moment of truth when we meet it. So here's the question: if that moment came for you today, would you be ready? Have you faced the parts of yourself you've kept in the shadows? Have you reconciled the contradictions in your own heart? Because for Jung, stepping into the light isn't about escaping life. It's about completing it. And that's something we can start working on long before we reach the other side. When most people hear Jung's vision of the gateway to the self, they imagine it as something that only appears in the final moments of life, standing before the great unknown, ready to cross over. But here's the truth. Jung understood that gateway isn't just waiting for you at death. It's here right now, woven into the choices you make, the truths you face, and the life you build. Every time you confront a difficult truth about yourself, you take a step toward that temple. Every moment you choose honesty over self-deception, forgiveness over resentment, or courage over avoidance, you're walking closer to the threshold of the self. Think about it. The same inner work that prepares you for death is the work that transforms how you live. Facing a painful childhood wound, that's stepping toward the gateway. Resolving a conflict you've avoided for years, another step. Finally making peace with a mistake you've carried like a stone in your chest. That's the kind of integration Jung believed could open the door when the time comes. I once heard the story of a man who had spent decades in bitter conflict with his brother. They hadn't spoken in over 20 years. As he approached the end of his life, he reached out one phone call, shaky and uncertain. That conversation, filled with tears and apologies, was the first and last they had before he passed. His family said he seemed lighter afterward, as if he'd set something down. That's what the inner work looks like. It's not abstract, it's deeply personal. Jung believed these moments are not just acts of kindness or personal growth, they're rehearsals for the final crossing. Because the self in its fullness cannot be met while parts of you are still in hiding, still fragmented, still at war with each other. Sometimes the gateway comes into view not in a dramatic, mystical vision, but in quiet moments of deep peace. Maybe it's sitting alone in nature, feeling completely at ease. Maybe it's holding someone you love, realizing nothing else matters more than this connection. These flashes of stillness and clarity are like previews of the wholeness that awaits beyond the threshold. The question is, how often do we ignore them? How often do we rush past those moments because we're too busy, too distracted, or too afraid to stop and feel them? Jung would challenge us here. He'd say the afterlife is shaped by the soul you bring to it. And the soul you bring is shaped by the life you live now. The work isn't about waiting, it's about practicing every day. So I want to leave you with this challenge. Imagine that today, right now, you were to stand before that radiant gateway in Jung's vision. Would you recognize the self that waits on the other side? Would you feel ready to step forward? Or would there still be unfinished work, words, unsaid truths, unacknowledged? Because whether or not you believe in Jung's temple as a literal place, the metaphor is powerful. Life gives us countless chances to take one more step toward the self. The real question is, will you take them? For Carl Jung, the temple he saw after death was never just a mystical destination. It was a mirror reflecting the soul you've built through every choice, every truth faced, every shadow confronted in your lifetime. In his view, what waits for you beyond that threshold isn't determined in a single moment of death. It's shaped by the way you've lived all the moments before it. If you've walked through life avoiding your truth, hiding from yourself, or clinging to illusions, the mirror might reveal parts you're not ready to face. But if you've done the work, integrating your light and shadow seeking wholeness, then stepping through could feel like coming home. That's why his vision still matters today. It's not just a story about the afterlife, it's a challenge about the present. It asks you to consider, what kind of soul are you building right now? So let me ask you directly, if the gateway from Jung's vision appeared to you today, would you be ready to step through? Would you recognize the self waiting on the other side? Or would you still have unfinished work to do? Maybe the more important question is, what could you do today to be more ready? Maybe it's reconciling with someone you've been estranged from. Maybe it's facing a truth you've avoided for years. Maybe it's simply learning to sit in stillness and really listen to yourself. Because the gateway isn't just waiting for you at the end of your life, it's here in every moment you choose growth over avoidance, authenticity over pretense, connection over isolation. If this has sparked something in you, I invite you to keep exploring. Don't just let this idea pass by, work with it. Let it challenge you. And if you want more deep dives into Carl Jung's visions and the soul's journey, subscribe and join our community of seekers. Together, we'll keep asking the deeper questions, and maybe step by step, we'll all be a little more ready when that gateway appears.